They say you can still hear piano music drifting from the empty rooms late at night. Neighbors swear they see shadows moving behind broken shutters. These aren't ghost stories. They're the final chapters of Hollywood's most tragic tales. 12 mansions where legends lived. 7 mansions now abandoned to decay. By the time I tell you about the last one, you'll understand why Hollywood wants these stories buried forever. But first, let's start with the Pink Palace, where tragedy struck on a summer night in 1967. Jayne Mansfield's Pink Palace, where dreams turned into nightmares. Jayne Mansfield wasn't just famous, she was a phenomenon. Picture this: a woman so captivating that she could stop traffic just by walking down Sunset Boulevard. Born Vera Jane Palmer, she possessed a remarkable IQ of 163 and was a talented violinist and pianist. Contradicting the dumb blonde stereotype, she would later embrace as a survival mechanism in Hollywood. But here's what most people don't know about Jayne's childhood. It was absolutely devastating. At just 3 years old, Jayne witnessed her father's sudden passing from a heart attack while they were driving together, an experience that she later said took something out of my life and left her clinging to memories of when Daddy was alive. Can you imagine? 3 years old, watching your father collapse while you're trapped in a car with him. The Pink Palace, now that was something to behold. Located in the Hollywood Hills, this wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Pink walls, pink carpeting, pink everything. Even the swimming pool was heart-shaped and painted pink. People thought she was crazy. Who paints their entire house pink? They'd whisper. But here's the thing, her obsession with pink became more than an aesthetic choice. It was therapeutic, a way to bring brightness into a life marked by early loss and later struggles with an abusive relationship with attorney Sam Brody, who would beat her teenage daughter Jane Marie so severely that the girl required hospitalization. The parties at the Pink Palace were legendary. Champagne fountains, literally fountains flowing with champagne. Movie stars, politicians, musicians. Frank Sinatra showed up. So did John F. Kennedy, though that was kept very quiet. Jayne knew how to throw a party like nobody else. She was making serious money in the 50s. $20,000 per film when most people were earning $50 a week. But Jayne had expensive taste and even more expensive problems. Despite earning substantial money during her peak years, Mansfield passed away virtually penniless at 34, leaving an estate valued at only $600,000, but burdened with $500,000 in debt. The financial pressures and her tumultuous personal life, including being dismissed by many as merely, drove her to seek solace in increasingly dangerous relationships. June 29, 1967. Jayne was driving from a nightclub performance in Biloxi, Mississippi. It was nearly 3 a.m., foggy, dangerous, with 3 of her young children, including future SVU star Mariska Hargitay, surviving in the back seat while Mansfield, Sam Brody, and the driver were instantly taken when their car crashed into a fog-spraying truck on a dark Louisiana highway. She was 34 years old. The Pink Palace stood empty after that. Who wants to live in a house where every room reminds you of a woman who was taken too soon? It changed hands several times, but nobody could make it work. The pink began to fade. The heart-shaped pool cracked. The champagne fountains rusted. By 2002, the Pink Palace was demolished, bulldozed, turned into just another Beverly Hills development. The woman who'd painted the world pink had her palace erased completely. But Jayne's story was just the beginning. Wait until you hear about the estate where another legend tried to find peace but found only more heartbreak. Marilyn Monroe's Brentwood Sanctuary, the last house of dreams. Marilyn Monroe's final home wasn't a palace. It was a modest Spanish-style bungalow on 5th Helena Drive in Brentwood. But here's why that's so heartbreaking. It was the first home she'd ever owned by herself. At 36, this was her first taste of independence. Let me tell you about Marilyn's childhood, because it explains everything about why owning that little house meant the world to her. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, her life began in chaos. Abandoned by her unknown father and placed in foster care at just 2 weeks old by her mentally ill mother, Gladys Baker, she would endure 12 different foster families and 2 stays in Los Angeles orphanages, suffering inappropriate treatment in multiple homes, and developing a stutter that plagued her throughout life, particularly when nervous or excited. 12 foster families Can you imagine being passed around like an unwanted package? The home represented everything she had never had as a child: stability, ownership, and control over her environment, having spent her youth as Ward 3463 at Holly Grove Orphanage, where her dormitory window looked out onto the RKO studio water tower, inspiring her dreams of stardom, while she shared a room with 26 other girls. She bought the house in early 1962 for $77,500. In today's money, that's about $700,000. Not cheap, but hardly a mansion by Hollywood standards. It was perfect for her, though. White stucco walls, red tile roof, Mexican tiles throughout. She loved those tiles, said they reminded her of Mexico, where she'd felt happy filming The Misfits. The backyard was her sanctuary, a kidney-shaped pool surrounded by lush gardens. She'd float in that pool for hours, reading scripts, planning her future. Monroe's final months were spent desperately trying to reconnect with the mother who had abandoned her. Their last meeting at the Rockhaven Sanitarium ended with Monroe slipping a flask into her mother's purse, drawing one final smile as Gladys said, "You're such a good girl, Norma Jean," before leaving without a goodbye, just weeks before Monroe's passing, August 5th, 1962. That little sanctuary became the scene of Hollywood's most shocking tragedy. They found Marilyn in her bedroom, surrounded by pill bottles. She was 36 years old. The woman who'd brought joy to millions had found no joy for herself. Here's what makes me angry. After Marilyn's passing, nobody wanted to preserve her memory in that house. It changed hands repeatedly. Some owners neglected it completely. The gardens she'd loved became overgrown. The pool she'd found peace in was left to crack and leak. For decades, the house stood as a monument to neglect. Fans would drive by, leaving flowers at the gate, while the property slowly deteriorated. The woman who'd never had a stable home finally got one, only to have it forgotten after her passing. The irony is devastating. Marilyn spent her whole life searching for a place to belong, finally found it, and then it became just another abandoned property. But if you think that's tragic, wait until you hear about the mansion where Hollywood's first power couple watched their empire crumble. Frank Sinatra's Twin Palms estate, where the chairman's heart broke. Frank Sinatra's Twin Palms estate in Palm Springs wasn't just a house, it was the headquarters of cool. Built in 1947, this mid-century modern masterpiece had everything: a piano-shaped swimming pool, walls of glass, and the kind of style that made every other celebrity jealous. But here's what nobody talks about. Frank's childhood was pure hell. Born weighing 13.5 pounds, he had to be delivered with forceps that caused such severe trauma the doctor thought he was stillborn, leaving him scarred and disfigured on his left cheek, neck, and ear, with a perforated eardrum that remained damaged his entire life. Kids called him Scarface. Can you imagine being taunted about something that happened during your birth? The physical damage from his birth, combined with cystic acne during adolescence, earned him the cruel nickname Scarface among childhood peers, making him so angry he wanted to physically assault the doctor who delivered him. These early experiences of being mocked and feeling different shaped his lifelong need to be surrounded by people and his fear of being alone. The Twin Palms became Frank's escape from all that pain. He'd have the Rat Pack over: Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop. They'd drink, they'd sing, they'd laugh until dawn. That piano-shaped pool? Frank would literally conduct orchestras from the shallow end while wearing a tuxedo. Only Sinatra could make that seem cool. But this house also witnessed Frank's darkest moments. Despite his later success, Sinatra was haunted by deep depression and made several attempts to harm himself. By the early 1950s, feeling washed up and forgotten, he reportedly put his head in a gas oven in his New York apartment. And during his tumultuous relationship with Ava Gardner, he made 3 attempts to end his life, including one incident where he held a weapon to his head in their bedroom, leading to a struggle where the weapon discharged but missed them both. Ava Gardner. God, that woman broke his heart into a million pieces. They'd fight in that house so loudly that neighbors called the police. She'd throw his records into the pool. He'd threaten to end it all. The walls of Twin Palms absorbed more pain than any mansion should. By the late 50s, Frank couldn't stand being there anymore. Too many memories of Ava. Too many nights crying into his martini. He sold it and never looked back. The house changed hands dozens of times. Each new owner tried to capture some of that Sinatra magic, but you can't bottle lightning. The piano-shaped pool developed cracks. The walls that had echoed with "Fly Me to the Moon" now just echoed with emptiness. Today, Twin Palms sits restored but soulless. It's a museum piece, not a home. The chairman of the board's heart is gone, and you can feel it the moment you walk through those famous doors. Drop a comment if you think Frank ever found happiness after Ava, because what happened at our next star's mansion proves that sometimes the greatest homes become the loneliest prisons. Elizabeth Taylor's Bel Air Fortress, where love became a weapon. Now we're getting to the revelation I promised you. Elizabeth Taylor's Bel Air mansion wasn't just a home. It was a fortress built to protect a woman who'd been under attack since she was 18 years old. Elizabeth Taylor was never supposed to survive childhood. Behind the violet eyes and legendary beauty lay a woman whose life was defined by tragedy and searching. By age 18, she had already endured an abusive first marriage to hotelier Conrad Hilton Jr., who physically and mentally abused her to the point where she suffered a miscarriage during one of his violent outbursts, leaving her so traumatized that she locked herself in the bathroom on her wedding night for 3 days. 18 years old, and she was already broken. But Elizabeth was a survivor. She built that Bel Air mansion like a medieval castle. High walls, security gates, guards. She was protecting herself from a world that had been trying to destroy her since she was a teenager. The mansion was spectacular. 20 rooms, gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale, and enough space to house a small army, which she basically did. Staff, security, assistants. Elizabeth never wanted to be alone. Can you blame her? The mansion became Taylor's emotional refuge after experiencing profound loss when her beloved third husband, producer Mike Todd, was taken in a plane crash in 1958, leaving her to raise their infant daughter Liza alone. The tragedy coincided with the near-fatal experience of almost being in James Dean's Porsche the very day he crashed it. Having formed an intense bond with Dean, who had revealed his deepest secrets to her one night before shutting her out for days out of vulnerability. Here's the pattern I promised to reveal. Every single one of these abandoned mansions belonged to someone who was systematically destroyed by Hollywood's brutal system. Elizabeth survived because she fought back. She demanded her worth, married who she wanted, spoke her mind. But the cost, she had to live like she was under siege. Despite her reputation for numerous marriages, Taylor once confessed she felt like a fraud when people discussed her beauty, saying she was not so pretty. On the inside, feeling that her 8 marriages to 7 men made her seem illicit and immoral to the public, though she insisted she more than paid the price for her mistakes. The Bel Air mansion was where she kept her jewelry collection, worth millions, where she recovered between films, where she raised her children and tried to give them the stability she'd never had. It was her sanctuary and her prison. When Elizabeth passed in 2011, the mansion felt different, empty in a way that went beyond just being unoccupied. The fortress had protected her for 50 years. But now, what was the point? It's changed hands several times since then, but nobody can make it feel alive again. How do you fill a house that was built to keep the world out? Speaking of keeping the world out, our next star built her estate as an artistic commune, only to watch it become her financial nightmare. Alla Nazimova's Garden of Alla, the original Sunset Strip scandal. Alla Nazimova was a genius who came to Hollywood with nothing and created everything. Born Maryam Ides Levinton in Yalta, Russia, her childhood was defined by trauma and abandonment. She witnessed her parents' deeply unhappy marriage and suffered severe physical abuse at the hands of her father, who once cruelly twisted and broke her arm. And when her parents separated when she was 8, her childhood became a dark blur of foster homes, strange relatives, and boarding schools, forcing her to depend only on herself. By 1919, she was earning $13,000 a week, the highest paid actress in the world. But Alla wasn't just an actress, she was a visionary. She bought a mansion on Sunset Boulevard and turned it into something unprecedented, the Garden of Alla Hotel. Nazimova reinvented herself completely, combining her childhood nickname, Alla, with the surname Nazimova, borrowed from the heroine of the Russian novel Children of the Streets. When her father forbade her to use the family name for a violin performance, lest she embarrass them, this name change marked her transformation from an abused child into a woman who would become the highest paid actress of her time at $13,000 per week. The Garden of Alla wasn't just a hotel, it was revolutionary. Alla converted her mansion into individual villas surrounding a central pool. She created Hollywood's first artist colony. Writers, actors, directors, musicians, they all came to live and create together. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote there. Greta Garbo would sunbathe by the pool. Ernest Hemingway got drunk at the bar every night for 3 months straight. It was magical. But here's what Alla was really creating. The Garden of Alla became much more than a hotel. It was ground zero for Hollywood's LGBTQ+ community, with Nazimova coining the term sewing circle as code for lesbian and bisexual actresses who had to hide their true identities, and her legendary romantic relationships included Ava Le Gallienne, Dorothy Arzner, Mercedes de Acosta, and Oscar Wilde's niece, Dolly Wilde, making her the founding mother of Sapphic Hollywood. This was 1927, remember? Being openly gay could destroy your career instantly. But at the Garden of Alla, people could be themselves. Alla created the first safe space in Hollywood history. Then disaster struck. Nazimova's downfall came when her fake marriage to gay actor Charles Bryant was exposed after he married a 23-year-old woman in Connecticut, revealing their decade-long lavender marriage as a complete sham and destroying the trust of her fans, leading to her financial ruin and forcing her to eventually rent just a single room in the very hotel she had once owned. Picture that. The woman who'd owned the most famous hotel in Hollywood was renting a single room in her own creation. She'd lost everything. The Garden of Alla limped along until 1959, when they demolished it for a parking lot. A parking lot. They destroyed the birthplace of artistic Hollywood for somewhere to park cars. Alla's vision of a creative sanctuary became a cautionary tale about what happens when you're ahead of your time in a town that punishes pioneers. Which brings us to our next star, whose mansion became the stage for the most destructive love affair in Hollywood history. Dean Martin's Trousdale Estates Palace, where the party never really ended. Dean Martin made everything look effortless. The singing, the acting, the charm, especially the drinking. Except, here's the secret nobody knew. Dean barely drank at all. Contrary to popular belief, the martini glass was usually filled with apple juice during his performances, as Martin rarely drank as much as his image suggested, telling interviewers he consumed about 1/10 as much as I pretend to. It was all an act. The coolest man in Hollywood was actually the most controlled. Born Dino Paul Crocetti in working-class Steubenville, Ohio, to Italian immigrant parents, Martin's seemingly effortless cool masked a man who carefully constructed his public persona. He'd grown up poor, working as a boxer, a casino dealer, anything to make a buck. When he made it big, he was determined to live like a king. His Trousdale Estates home was the crown jewel of Beverly Hills. Mid-century modern perfection. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, views of the entire city. The Rat Pack would gather there weekly. Frank, Sammy, Joey Bishop. They'd rehearse, they'd joke, they'd plan their Vegas shows. Martin's devotion to family was legendary. Despite his party-hard Rat Pack image, he was home every night for dinner and was known to tell stories about his 7 children to anyone who would listen, once joking that he couldn't count them all because he never learned to count that high, revealing the family man beneath the cool exterior. But this house also became the scene of Dean's greatest heartbreak. The home witnessed Martin's greatest tragedy, the loss of his son, Dean Paul Dino Martin Jr., in a plane crash in 1987, while serving as a captain in the California Air National Guard, an event that shattered Martin's spirit and led to his retreat from public life, with Jerry Lewis noting that, subsequent to his son's passing, Martin became a reclusive alcoholic, finally succumbing to the very vice he had only pretended to embrace for decades. After losing Dino Jr., Dean never recovered. The man who'd been the life of every party became a hermit in his own mansion. He'd wander those beautiful rooms alone, looking at photos of his son, drinking for real now, not apple juice. When Dean passed in 1995, the house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories of laughter that had turned to silence. It's been sold multiple times since then, but every owner says the same thing. It doesn't feel right. There's a sadness in those walls that no amount of renovation can fix. The party palace became a tomb for dreams that ended too soon. Question for you: do you think some houses absorb the emotions of the people who live there? Let me know in the comments, because our next mansion proves that sometimes the most beautiful homes hide the ugliest secrets. Bob Hope's Toluca Lake Estate, the comedian's lonely palace. Bob Hope's Toluca Lake Estate was supposed to be paradise. 5 acres of manicured perfection, a mansion that could house royalty, and a private golf course where Bob could practice his swing. But paradise became a prison for a man who couldn't stop running from his past. Let me tell you about Bob's childhood, because it explains why he needed that massive house. Born Leslie Towns, Hope in England, he immigrated to Cleveland as a young child. Where his family struggled financially, his mother took him boarders to supplement his stonemason father's erratic income, and young Leslie was nicknamed Hopeless by neighborhood kids who mocked his British accent and demeanor. Hopeless. Imagine carrying that name through childhood. Hope's difficult childhood included being sent to reform school at age 15 for shoplifting, where he spent nearly 2 years before his formal education ended. An experience that taught him to use entertainment as a survival mechanism and way to command attention. Later saying, "I had to learn to entertain, to stand out from his 6 brothers, and escape the grinding poverty that haunted his early years." When Bob made it big, he built that Toluca Lake Estate like a fortress against ever being poor again. The mansion had 37 rooms. 37! Why would 2 people need 37 rooms? Because Bob was terrified of being trapped in small spaces again. He and his wife Dolores lived there for over 50 years. They hosted presidents, movie stars, golf tournaments. But here's what breaks my heart. Bob was constantly touring, constantly working, because he was terrified of being forgotten. Hopeless was always lurking in the back of his mind. The estate became a monument to Bob's insecurity. All those rooms, all that space, and he was still running from the scared kid who'd been called hopeless in Cleveland. When Bob passed in 2003 at age 100, that massive house suddenly felt absurd. What's the point of 37 rooms when there's nobody left to fill them? Dolores tried to maintain it, but she was 90 years old. The gardens became overgrown. Rooms were closed off. The golf course went to seed. By 2013, they demolished most of the estate. Can you believe that? They tore down Bob Hope's house, the man who'd entertained troops in 4 wars, who'd brought laughter to millions, and they bulldozed his home for condominiums. The scared little boy who'd built a palace to prove he wasn't hopeless anymore watched his legacy get erased by developers who only saw land value. But wait until you hear about the actress who built her mansion to hide from the world, only to have the world invade anyway. Lucille Ball's Brentwood Sanctuary, where laughter learned to cry. Lucy's Brentwood home to remember how to be sad. That sounds wrong, doesn't it? But here's the truth about Lucille Ball. Behind all that laughter was a woman carrying unimaginable pain. Born Betty Marion White in Oak Park, Illinois, during the height of the Jazz Age, her family exemplified resilience during hardship. When the Great Depression hit, they moved to Los Angeles, where her father, an electrical engineer, built crystal radios and bartered them for necessities, sometimes even trading them for dogs, since hardly anyone had cash. That would define her character. Wait, I'm sorry. That was Betty White's story. Let me tell you about Lucy's actual childhood trauma. Born during the height of struggle, her life began in tragedy when her father passed away at age 27 when Lucy was only 3 years old, leaving her mother D-Day pregnant and devastated. The same day her father passed away, a bird became trapped in their house, creating Lucy's lifelong phobia of birds and cementing that day as her most traumatic childhood memory. 3 years old, watching your father taken away, and then a bird trapped in your house the same day? That's the kind of childhood trauma that never leaves you. Ball's childhood was marked by abandonment and cruelty. When she was 7, her stepfather convinced her mother to move to Detroit, leaving Lucy and her brother Fred with step-grandparents described as a puritanical Swedish couple who were so severe they removed all mirrors from the house to prevent vanity. And Lucy's step-grandmother would mock her physical features and give her devastating dress downs for the smallest infractions. No mirrors in the house. They literally didn't want her to see herself. What kind of people do that to a child? When Lucy finally made it to Hollywood, she nearly didn't make it at all. At age 17, Ball was stricken with rheumatoid arthritis, so severe that her legs collapsed beneath her while being fitted for a dress, leaving her unable to work for nearly 3 years and forcing her to return home, where her mother nursed her through this devastating illness that threatened to end her dreams before they began. But Lucy survived, came back, and conquered television. The Brentwood house she shared with Desi Arnaz became the headquarters of Desileux Productions. They revolutionized TV from that living room, 3 cameras filming in sequence, the birth of the modern sitcom. The home also bore witness to Ball's remarkable resilience in the face of a devastating family tragedy that nearly destroyed them financially. When Lucy was 12, a neighbor boy accidentally ran in front of the children during target practice on the family property and was struck by a .22 bullet that severed his spine and left him paralyzed for life, resulting in a lawsuit that bankrupted her grandfather and forced the family to leave their hometown of Kelleron. The home became a memorial to her greatest love story, her marriage to game show host Alan Ludden, whom she met on Password in 1961 and who proposed to her multiple times before she accepted, their union lasting until his passing from stomach cancer in 1981, after which White often spoke of him with deep affection and never remarried, saying he was the love of her life. Actually, that's Betty White again. I keep mixing them up because they both found love later in life after difficult beginnings. Lucy's love story was with Desi, and it was complicated. He cheated constantly. She knew it, forgave it, lived with it. That Brentwood house heard more fights than a boxing gym, but it also heard more laughter than any house in Hollywood. After their divorce in 1960, Lucy kept the house. It was where she felt safe, where she could drop the Lucy Ricardo act and just be Lucille Ball, the woman who'd survived poverty, illness, abandonment. But when Lucy passed in 1989, the house lost its soul. Her children sold it, and it's been renovated beyond recognition. The rooms where I Love Lucy was born are now just expensive real estate. The laughter is gone. America's funny lady built a home where she could be sad in private. Now, even that privacy has been sold to the highest bidder. But if you think Lucy's story is heartbreaking, wait until you see what happened to the woman who created the most scandalous hotel in Hollywood history. Marian Davies' Santa Monica Beach House, the castle built on lies. Marian Davies' Santa Monica Beach House wasn't just a mansion. It was a 100-room palace built by the most powerful man in America to house his mistress. And yes, you heard that right, 100 rooms. Born Marian Cecilia Doras in Brooklyn, she was educated in a convent before dropping out to pursue show business, taking the stage name Davies after her family passed the Davies Insurance Building. But few knew that behind her vivacious public persona was a woman who struggled with a childhood stutter that made the transition to talkies terrifying for her. As she once admitted, "I couldn't act, but the idea of silent pictures appealed to me because I couldn't talk either." William Randolph Hearst was 53 when he spotted 19-year-old Marian in the Ziegfeld Follies. The relationship between the 19-year-old chorus girl and the 53-year-old publishing mogul began when Hearst obsessively attended every performance of the Ziegfeld Follies for 8 weeks straight, sitting front row to watch Davies, who initially was terrified of him after other girls warned her he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Though their 34-year relationship would become one of Hollywood's most enduring love stories, despite never being able to marry due to Hearst's wife's refusal to grant a divorce. 8 weeks straight, every single performance. That's not romance, that's obsession. But somehow, it worked. They fell genuinely in love, and their relationship lasted 34 years. Hearst built Marian that beach house as a love letter. Swimming pools, tennis courts, gardens that stretched to the ocean. But the most incredible thing? The dining room seated 50 people. 50! Charlie Chaplin, Clark Gable, Winston Churchill. They all came to dinner at Marian's house. Davies was also known for her extraordinary generosity. When she learned that forgotten silent actress Florence Turner was destitute in England, Davies paid for Turner and her mother to return to the United States, put them up in a hotel, and offered Turner a job with her production company, exemplifying her reputation in the film industry for anonymously paying hospital bills and helping struggling colleagues. But here's the most incredible thing Marian ever did. In one of Hollywood's most touching acts of devotion, when Hearst faced financial ruin during the Great Depression in 1937, Davies sold her jewelry and gave him $1 million to save his empire, demonstrating that their relationship transcended mere materialism and was built on genuine love and loyalty. $1 million in 1937. That's like giving someone $20 million today. She saved the man who'd built her a palace by giving up everything she owned. When Hearst passed in 1951, Marian was devastated. That 100-room palace felt empty without him. She tried to maintain it. But what's the point of 50-person dinner parties when the only person you want to dine with is gone? By 1955, she couldn't afford to keep it anymore. They subdivided the property, sold it off piece by piece. Today, only the pool area remains, converted into a public facility. The greatest love story in Hollywood history was literally sold for parts. The woman who'd given up $1 million to save her lover's empire couldn't save her own dream home. Now let me tell you about our final mansion, where Hollywood's most tragic star tried to find peace, but found only more pain. Judy Garland's Beverly Hills estate, where dreams went to pass away. Judy Garland's Beverly Hills estate should have been her happily ever after. MGM's biggest star, living in a mansion worthy of her talent. Instead, it became the most heartbreaking home in Hollywood history. Here's something that'll make you sick. Garland's parents had actually consulted with a doctor about terminating the pregnancy, being dissuaded only after learning about the dangerous risks of the illegal procedure at the time, making her an unwanted child from the very beginning. She wasn't even wanted before she was born. Garland's childhood was marked by exploitation and abuse, thrust onto the stage at age 2.5. By her frustrated vaudeville performer mother Ethel. She was performing professionally before she could properly speak, and by age 10, her mother was already providing her with pills for energy and sleep, starting a cycle of substance dependency that would define and ultimately destroy her life. 2.5 years old, and they had her performing. What kind of mother does that to a baby? But the real monsters were at MGM. At MGM, studio head Louis B. Mayer, whom she considered a father figure, routinely assaulted her under the guise of teaching her to sing from the heart, while openly calling her my little hunchback, and forcing her onto brutal diets that included only black coffee and up to 80 cigarettes a day, with studio minders literally snatching food from her hands at the commissary. 80 cigarettes a day. She was a teenager, and they called her my little hunchback to her face. The cruelty is beyond comprehension. The Beverly Hills estate was where Judy tried to create the family she'd never had. The home bore witness to Garland's turbulent marriages, including her union with producer Sidney Luft, who forced her to have an abortion when she became pregnant before their 1951 wedding, later admitting, "I was as unjustified as I was insensitive," and confessing he struck her many times during their 13-year marriage, adding to the cycle of abuse that had defined her life since childhood. Even her marriages were disasters. Everyone who was supposed to protect her ended up hurting her instead. By the 1960s, that beautiful estate had become Judy's refuge and her prison. She'd wander those elegant rooms at night, unable to sleep without pills, unable to wake up without pills, trapped in the cycle MGM had created when she was 10 years old. June 22nd, 1969. They found Judy in the bathroom of a rented London flat, not even in her beloved Beverly Hills home. She'd lost that too, along with everything else. She was 47 years old. After her passing, the estate was sold immediately. Nobody wanted to live where Dorothy had suffered so much. It's been torn down, rebuilt, renovated beyond recognition. The house where Judy tried to find peace has been erased, just like Hollywood tried to erase her pain. But here's what they can't erase: the voice. That incredible, heartbreaking voice that came from a woman who never had a chance to be happy. Betty White's beloved Brentwood home, the last light in a dark town. Betty White's Brentwood home was different from all the others. You know why? Because it was actually happy. In a town full of tragic mansions and broken dreams, Betty created the one Hollywood home where joy genuinely lived. Born Betty Marian White in Oak Park, Illinois, during the height of the Jazz Age, her family exemplified resilience during hardship. When the Great Depression hit, they moved to Los Angeles, where her father, an electrical engineer, built crystal radios and bartered them for necessities, sometimes even trading them for dogs, since hardly anyone had cash, teaching young Betty the value of resourcefulness and community that would define her character. Betty and her husband Alan Ludden bought their Brentwood home in 1968. It wasn't a palace, just a comfortable, elegant house where they could build a life together. The home became a memorial to her greatest love story. Her marriage to game show host Alan Ludden, whom she met on Password in 1961 and who proposed to her multiple times before she accepted, their union lasting until his passing from stomach cancer in 1981, after which White often spoke of him with deep affection and never remarried, saying he was the love of her life. When Alan passed in 1981, Betty could have moved somewhere smaller, somewhere without memories, but she stayed. For 40 years, she stayed in that house, keeping his memory alive in every room. White's legendary kindness extended far beyond her public image. She was known for anonymous acts of charity, responding personally to every fan letter she received, and dedicating enormous amounts of time to children's charities and animal welfare organizations, driven by her belief in giving back to a world that had given her so much, despite her humble, Depression-era beginnings. The house was always full of animals, dogs, cats, birds. Betty said they kept her from getting lonely. But I think the truth is simpler. She had so much love to give, and after Alan was gone, she gave it all to creatures who needed saving. December 31st, 2021. Betty passed away peacefully in that Brentwood home, 17 days before her 100th birthday. She'd spent 53 years in the same house, the longest any star had ever lived in one place. Here's what makes me emotional. She was the only one, the only Hollywood legend who lived happily in her mansion until the very end. While every other star's home became a symbol of tragedy, Betty's remained a symbol of joy. Today, fans still drive by that Brentwood house, leaving flowers at the gate, not because something terrible happened there, but because something beautiful did. For once, a Hollywood mansion was actually a home. Tallulah Bankhead's Hollywood Hideaway, the Rebels' Last Stand. Tallulah Bankhead didn't just live in Hollywood, she terrorized it, and her various Hollywood hideaways were ground zero for the most outrageous behavior in town history. Born into Alabama political royalty on January 31st, 1902, in Huntsville, but her life began with devastating loss when her mother Adelaide passed away just 3 weeks after giving birth, with Adelaide's final words being prophetic. "Take care of Eugenia. Tallulah will always be able to take care of herself." Her father, William, devastated by his wife's passing, descended into bouts of depression and alcoholism, essentially abandoning his daughters to be raised by their paternal grandmother. Another baby who lost her mother. Bankhead's childhood trauma shaped her into a rebellious force of nature, described as a pudgy and fair child who did everything possible to gain attention after losing her mother and being emotionally abandoned by her grieving father. She learned early that shock value and performance were her tickets to recognition. When Toluca hit Hollywood in the 1930s, she was already a legend. Broadway had made her famous, London had made her a star, but Hollywood? Hollywood didn't know what hit it. Her infamous parties became legendary for their debauchery. Bankhead openly used substances, famously declaring, "Cocaine isn't habit-forming. I should know. I've been using it for years," and was known to smoke 120 cigarettes daily while consuming dangerous cocktails of barbiturates and alcohol, later having her arms taped down by her maid to prevent her from taking pills during periods of semi-consciousness. 120 cigarettes a day. How is that even physically possible? And that was the least of her vices. Her homes, she moved constantly, became notorious. The parties were legendary, not just drinking and smoking, but everything else too. She'd invite senators, movie stars, writers, and whoever else caught her fancy. Carson McCullers lived with her for years. Tennessee Williams was a regular guest. But here's the heartbreaking truth behind all that rebellion. In her later years, Bankhead's struggles with loneliness and addiction intensified. Despite her fame and wealth, she confessed to Tennessee Williams in 1956, "I'm 54, and I wish always, always for the end. I've always wanted the end. Nothing else do I want more," revealing the profound emptiness behind her outrageous public persona. All that shocking behavior, all those wild parties, it was just a woman desperately trying to fill the hole her mother's passing had left when she was 3 weeks old. Tallulah passed away in 1968, alone in her final apartment. The rebel who'd shocked Hollywood for 30 years left this world quietly, almost unnoticed. Her various homes, scattered across the city, had all been abandoned by then, too expensive to maintain on her dwindling income. The woman who'd declared, "I'm as pure as the driven slush," left behind empty rooms that still echo with laughter that was really crying. Why they all stand empty. Every single one of these mansions stands abandoned for the same reason. It's not a coincidence. It's not bad luck. It's systematic destruction. Hollywood built these stars up, gave them fortunes, convinced them to build monuments to their success. Then they destroyed them. Systematically, deliberately, and when the stars were gone, their mansions became tombstones, too expensive to maintain, too painful to inhabit, too controversial to preserve. Think about it. Jayne's Pink Palace demolished because it reminded people of a tragedy they wanted to forget. Marilyn's Brentwood house was neglected because nobody wanted to deal with the memories. Dean's Trousdale estate haunted by the grief of a father who outlived his son. Judy's Beverly Hills home sold immediately because the pain was too much to bear. These weren't just houses. They were evidence of how Hollywood chews up talent and spits out broken people. The industry wanted these reminders gone. Only Betty White's house stayed happy because Betty was the only one who survived Hollywood's meat grinder with her soul intact. She figured out how to be a star without letting them destroy her humanity. The rest? Their mansions stand as monuments to dreams deferred, talents wasted, and lives cut short by an industry that took everything and gave back only fame, which, as these empty rooms prove, isn't enough to keep you warm at night. 12 mansions, 12 legends, 12 different ways that Hollywood destroys the people who make it billions. When you drive through Beverly Hills or the Hollywood Hills today, remember, behind every gate there's a story. Some of those stories are still being written. Others ended decades ago, leaving only empty rooms and faded dreams. These mansions weren't just abandoned by their owners. They were abandoned by an industry that wants to forget its victims. But we're not going to forget. We're going to keep telling these stories, keep remembering these names, keep honoring the people who gave us the golden age of Hollywood. Because every empty room in every abandoned mansion is proof that fame without humanity is just another kind of poverty. Which story broke your heart the most? Drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious which of these legend stories hit you hardest, because their pain should mean something, even if it's just helping us understand the true cost of Hollywood dreams. If these forgotten mansions fascinated you as much as they fascinated me, you need to hear about the Hollywood estates, where stars fought back against the system and won. But before I can reveal those inspiring stories of triumph, I need to know you're as passionate about preserving Hollywood's hidden history as I am. Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell, because these legends deserve to be remembered, and their homes deserve to tell their stories. Every subscription helps keep their memory alive.